That ultimately led to a call from a senior police officer. And I'll always remember, he walked into my office, shut the door and said, right, this conversation is off the record. At least 50 million people are held in situations of slavery. And we would say it's an illicit commodity trade that is worth about $500 billion profit per annum. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
How many slaves work for you?
None.
Do you eat food?
Yes.
Have you got a smartphone?
Yes.
And thankfully I can see that you're wearing clothes.
Yes.
Without doing anything, you are probably personally connected to 40 to 60 slaves in the world.
Andrew, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here.
Thanks for making the effort to come all the way down from Bristol.
It was a bit of a trek, but it's the sunshine is here. I left in rain, and now it's sunshine.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, let's roll all the way back. Where did you grow up, and how did you get into the world of trying to prevent modern-day slavery?
How long have we got? Where did I grow up? By age 11, I'd lived in 13 different places, mainly overseas. My dad was a vicar, so ended up living in Singapore, then South Korea, and then came home to the UK age 7. So I'm now sort of technically called an adult third culture kid. So I'm strangely at home in airports. Is the way I like to describe it. Or the other way of describing it is, look, wherever I am, I'm at home.
Yeah.
I love travel. I love going to visit new places, and I just feel perfectly at home. So I don't have that. I wish I could.
Yeah.
And I don't desperately need a cup of tea when I'm in a country where you can't get a cup of tea. Around that, and then I grew up in Sevenoaks in Kent. That's where I did my secondary school, and then went to university. Then I started work in retail management. So worked for Marks and Spencer, joined their graduate program. And then from there went to London Electricity that had just privatised. And from there then I had a complete switcheroo, and I went and worked for a church for a bit in London, and then moved to Bristol, still working for the church, and then I went back into retail management, some project management consultancy work in the university sector, and then as part of working for the church, came across this issue of trafficking.
So trafficking, you're talking about human trafficking? Human
trafficking.
And how old were you when you came across this issue, roughly?
2007, so what's that, 15 years ago?
Okay.
40.
Okay.
So, I'd had a career, in public sector, private sector, faith sector, consultancy sector, and then it ran into this issue.
Yeah.
And it was a colleague of mine that was actually in Ukraine at the time and stopped somebody being trafficked and ended up buying them off their trafficker.
You're joking me.
No. So that story came back, and I've been to Ukraine previously, and back then it was fairly Wild West, but this kind of took it to the next level, and I was intrigued. I was kind of like, okay, that's an interesting story. And then 3 months later, a friend of mine who was a teacher, she had spent her summers also coincidentally working in Ukraine, trying to deal with the social orphan problem, and trying to help those orphans, what we call social orphans, sort of not only survive in the orphanages, but trying to work out how to transition them from age 16 when they get turfed out of the orphanages to make it into university and have better life chances and everything else. And came across the issue of actually these kids would leave the orphanages, and parked outside the orphanages were the traffickers. These kids would get into the back of a car, drive off and disappear. And back then, and in the early 1990s and 2000s, I know now, something like 400,000 people disappeared from Ukraine, women and children primarily, vast majority into trafficking situations. So these two stories came across my desk, and it piqued my interest because I think as most people growing up in this country, we thought, well, the transatlantic slave trade died.
Hundreds of years
ago.
That's what I thought,
So what is this phenomena? And then the thing that sort of helped me knit it all together in my brain, in whatever way my brain works, was I ended up reading an article that was talking about trafficking, and it was then about trafficking for sexual exploitation from Eastern Europe to the US. And they used to use the regional airports in the UK in order to avoid detection at the major hubs, the Heathrows, the Gatwicks, the Frankfurts.
Yeah.
And one of the airports that was named was Bristol, where I live.
Mm.
So I went, oh, hang on. Story from a colleague, story from a friend, now this article. And because we did a lot of work around sort of social justice and working with the poor and the marginalised, I suppose I had a level of access, and I just wrote what I thought was normal to all the Bristol MPs, every single member of the council and the chief constable, going, is there a problem? If there is a problem, how can we help? And what are you doing about it?
Mm.
And to cut, a very long story short, that ultimately led to a call from a senior police officer. I don't remember giving them my telephone number, but somehow they got my telephone number, inviting himself to coffee. And he came, I remember, and I'll always remember, he walked into my office, shut the door and said, right, this conversation is off the record. And then really for the next 3 hours just peeled a layer off the city. And because he was senior enough, a layer off the country. And he was frustrated as a cop because he was trying to arrest the bad people.
Yeah.
And back then, this is sort of 2007, where the narrative was mainly around trafficking for sexual exploitation. They would bust illegal brothels. They would know that the women in there were victims, but the only thing they could do was arrest them, stick them in a hotel and B&B overnight. They would disappear, and he knew that they went straight back to their traffickers. And he was frustrated that because they weren't being supported, they wouldn't reveal who their exploiters were. He couldn't go after the bad guys.
Wow.
And the end of that long conversation where, you go from your jaw's on the floor because you just didn't realize this side of society existed, to becoming more sort of infuriated that, the system was so crap. He said to me, look, any idiot can write a letter. I went, yeah, I've done that. He said, well, you can retire happy because everybody's trying to, flap round, trying to answer your questions, and nobody quite knows the answers to the questions. But what are you actually going to do about it? And for some reason, I immediately responded. I said, well, what do you need? That was my first mistake. He said, I need a safe house. I need to be able to put these victims somewhere safe where they're cared for, where others look after them, because that's not policing skill set. It's not our job. So that we can earn their trust, so that they can then tell us what's happened to them, so that we can then go after the bad guys. And I said, okay, I'll do that on one condition. You're my first trustee, because at this point you know more than me. And we agreed and we shook on it. I mean, that was literally how Unseen started. It was kind of like being sort of slammed into a brick wall of reality. And I suppose that if I look back on my life, I've always been concerned about social justice issues, wherever I've worked. And it was just like the injustice of it that I think just compelled me to go, all right, do it. And so, and because he was senior enough, he was able then to get me into the Home Office and what was then the Serious Crime Agency, and just very quickly realised that there wasn't really a response to this issue. It was very, very fragmented. Everybody was working against each other. And then my friend, this teacher, Kate, I just said to her, look, do you want to come and try and do this? We both acknowledge there's an issue. We both want to do something about it. We haven't got any money. This police officer is our first trustee. It's the three of us. Shall we do it? I was just like, it's a big sell, isn't it? And I mean, thankfully, she had reached that point where she didn't want to teach anymore. And she said, look, I'll give you 3-4 months because I'm just going to work out what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so we started asking people, to help and support us. And I mean, at the 11th hour, literally 11:59, it was Comic Relief that believed that in what we wanted to do, and they gave us a big grant, which meant we could start the first safe house, and it went from there. But we never wanted to be an organisation that was just a safety net for people, because that's kind of like accepting bad things happen to people. So we always said from the get-go, we want to, care for victims, because that's the immediate need, but we want to turn the tap off. And so from day one that we were doing those things simultaneously. And the organisation has grown and developed over the years.
So you say you wanted to care for victims who are prostitutes, working sex workers, and then you're trying to bring them into a safe house where you're trying to get information out of them on who they're being pimped out by.
So I think the first thing is, if you're a victim of trafficking for sexual exploitation,
Yeah.
you're not choosing to go into the sex trade.
Yeah. Are you forced?
You're forced into it.
Yeah.
So the definition of trafficking is the recruitment by deception,
Yeah.
movement for the purposes of exploitation.
Okay.
And a movement could be from one side of the street to the other, so
Yeah.
it isn't just an international border. And so back then, most of the victims that were in trafficking for sexual exploitation were not prostitutes.
Yeah.
They had, you'll have to listen to this after the 9 p.m. watershed, but if you are forced to have sex against your will,
Yeah.
that's statutory rape.
Yeah.
And that's the reality for
Right.
these women. So they weren't choosing to do it. Now, there are people that are in the sex trade
Yeah.
that are exploited, that end up in a trafficking situation. There are people that can be trafficked who know that they're going into the sex trade,
Yeah.
but what they haven't agreed to is the level of exploitation.
Yeah.
And the critical thing is, and they're not free to leave it.
Yeah.
That they're under threat and violence and coercion
Yeah.
in that whole process. But trafficking is much wider than just sexual exploitation. It's forced labour, domestic servitude, forced criminality.
What's the
and
second one you said?
Domestic servitude.
Which is?
So that would be, and usually this involves sort of foreign nationals that are travelling here. They will bring a home help with them,
Yeah.
or a nanny, and that person isn't paid,
Right. Okay.
forced to work all hours,
Yeah.
not free to leave that situation. So I mean, those sort of there's a consistency about it. And if you say what is the consistency, and the term we use in the UK is modern slavery. It's the umbrella term, which covers trafficking, slavery, and servitude. The consistency is it is about making money,
Yeah.
and it's about taking you.
Mm.
If I was a trafficker looking at you, it would be going, oh, look, Dodge, I can make money. How do I make money? I turn you into a commodity.
Yeah.
I completely control you. You're going to make me vast amounts of profit.
Yeah.
And the chances of me getting caught, globally, 0.01%.
Right,
So
okay.
why wouldn't I do it when you can make me $250,000 a year
Yeah.
tax-free?
Yeah. Wow.
Welcome to my world.
Welcome. Wow. And that's what you're dealing with. Have you had any trouble yourself when you're actually dealing with these situations, and actually you're going back to find out who are actually trafficking these women, these sex slaves, I guess? Is that the right terminology, sex slaves or sex workers? Or
We term the people that come to our services survivors.
survive? Okay.
Because if you think of the horrors that they've been
Yeah.
through, whether it is raped or beaten up, violently beaten up.
Yeah.
Often we have to, the first people that our clients need to go and see are dentists, because some of them will have had their teeth smashed out with a hammer, or they need to go and see the medics because they will have had a broken bone which hasn't been set properly, or they will have an alcohol addiction just as a means of coping with the horrors
to suppress the feelings. Yeah.
And I think to help our listeners understand, I talked to a psychologist once and said, okay, what happens to a human being when they realize they have no volition, no freedom, and they're nothing more than a commodity?
Yeah.
And they said it's catastrophic for the human psyche to be in that. I mean, it's the amount of, it's not just despair. It's despair on top of fright, on top of fear, on top of repercussions, not just for myself, but potentially for my family. And traffickers are really smart. They'll go, oh, look, here's my smartphone. Is that your mother? Look at the date.
Yeah.
You step out of line.
Yeah.
Now, whether they can do that or not,
It's still a threat, isn't
it's
it?
still a threat
Yeah.
in that whole process. So we call them survivors, and ultimately we just want to call them John and Jane, and because they're people. They don't want to be defined by their exploitation. They want to recover who they are.
Give me an example of how you would go and find someone who you want to be a survivor?
We don't, and this this police officer was really clear, and actually it was one of the best pieces of advice I was given. He said, look, the policing's job is this.
Yeah.
This is the definition of what we do. Your job is this here, right next to it. But let's make sure we don't cross boundaries. So in the UK, 97% of all victims are found by police or UK Border Force or the National Crime Agency.
Yeah.
And that's appropriate. It's not appropriate for a charity to go out and think, we're the seventh emergency service, and there are those that want that gung-ho mentality, and I always get nervous when I hear anti-trafficking charities talking about rescue, because actually that's not our job. Now, as Unseen has grown, we developed and put in place the UK's Modern Slavery Helpline, which has been running for the last 6 years. So we get calls from members of the public going, I've seen something and I'm not quite sure whether it's whatever, through to I know this is going on and here's the details in that whole process. We get calls from victims. I mean, and often a call from victim will start with, I'm calling for my friend Paul. By call 7, I am Paul. And by call 10, I'm in an awful situation. Can you get me out of it? And we can work really closely with the police or another NGO in order to facilitate that whole process. Or we get calls from businesses going, we think we've got a problem with forced labour somewhere in our supply chains, or we've got concerns, and then we work with that business to, both first and foremost protect the potential victims and make sure that they're cared for. Again, liaising with policing. And then work with that business to try and resolve the problems.
So are there police forces out there looking for exploiters?
Yeah.
So they're constantly, there's actually a section of the police force saying we're constantly looking for this to actually nip this in the bud.
So modern slavery is on what's called the National Threat Assessment for the UK, which means that the UK government says as a whole, this is a major threat to the UK. And therefore, every police force is tasked with looking at it. Now, some police forces have dedicated units, and some of those units are what we call multi-agency in that whole process. And it's recognizing both the scale of the problem and just where there are opportunities for people to speak up and say, I need help, or where people go, do you know what, I think I've spotted the signs there. That house where all the guys leave every morning at 5 a.m. in a white van, they disappear, they come back the same day, 10 o'clock at night, go in. None of them ever interact with their neighbours in that whole process. There just seems to be some person in control of them the whole time. They seem kowtowed. Or the house that's been used as an illegal brothel, or the house that's used as a cannabis grow, or the car wash, or the nail bar, or the distribution centre, or
the nail bar, what, as in the Chinese nail bars?
Yeah.
Wow. So this is going on in a high street. I didn't even know there was a thing called modern day slavery. I thought slavery was something from 100 odd years ago.
So,
like literally, how would you break down? How can you actually just break down in simple terms the actual modern day slavery? How someone goes from Eastern Europe into our borders, into our country, and then gets set up.
So now I'm going to shock you.
Yeah.
So last year there were about 13,000 victims found in the UK.
Found that are now survivors?
Yeah.
Or people that reached out to you?
Yeah, to us and others.
Okay.
So in the UK we have what's called a national referral mechanism.
Yeah.
So 13,000 people were identified. 13,000. The experts would say at any one time in the UK there are at least 100,000 victims of slavery. If you look at children, UK nationals are the most prevalent, and if you look at adults, UK nationals make up a third of all the victims.
UK nationals?
UK nationals. So it isn't just people coming from Eastern Europe. We have seen over 100 different nationalities found as victims of exploitation in the UK.
And a third of that are
British.
British?
A third of them are British.
You are joking me.
No. And globally, the latest estimates, and it's a conservative figure, say that at least 50 million people are held in situations of slavery. And we would say it's an illicit commodity trade that is worth about $500 billion profit per annum. And the cost to the UK, and this is Home Office figures, if there's 100,000 victims, what do you think the cost to the UK is?
Just as a complete guess, a couple of million quid.
35 billion.
30 miles off. 35 billion.
Yeah.
Cost to the UK. Why is it such a cost to the UK?
So it's...
I don't know where 2 million quid come from, by the way. But you put me on the spot there, and I was like...
So the Cabinet Office have like the cost of everything. And so
just roll back there a little bit. What's the Cabinet Office?
So the Cabinet Office is part of government.
Okay.
It's the government department. Like if you ever walk past 10 Downing Street,
yes.
if you go past the Black Gates and you're walking up towards Trafalgar Square,
yep.
the next building you come to is called the Cabinet Office.
Okay.
And it's the office of government that coordinates all the other different departments, like Department of Health, Department of Education.
Okay.
It kind of sort of sets
the umbrella for the whole. Yeah. Okay.
But they do a cost of everything. Like, what's the cost of, like, if a child goes missing? What's the policing costs, social costs, and everything else? So the Cabinet Office and the Home Office said, for every victim we find, the cost to UK PLC is about £350,000, give or take. So if you've got 100,000 victims, 350,000, that times that, 35 billion.
I'm really taken back by that stat there, that 30% of British. I want to. How's that working? How's that happening? Where's that coming from? Is there a main area in the UK that is prevalent for this? Is it up north, Midlands, down south, or is it everywhere? And where does it stem from?
It's everywhere. So it's in the big cities, it's in towns, it's in villages, it's in the fields. So if we look at UK nationals in particular, large numbers of them are caught up in what we call forced labour. So, and there's been some sort of quite landmark cases in terms of UK nationals caught up in this. There was there was a gentleman that had been in a situation of slavery for 13 years, Darrell Sinister. Do you remember? He was found on a farm in South Wales.
Oh, I saw something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So he's a victim of modern slavery, and he was a victim of forced labour. So he was forced to work on the farm. He slept in a caravan, a dilapidated caravan, outside. His bath was an iron tub outside, and that was it. And for 13 years, he lived like that. How did he end up in that situation? He was preyed upon. So he had, I think, some learning difficulties and mental health issues, and he was offered a job and accommodation by this father and son, these farmers, which is what he wanted, because everyone wants to work, everyone wants, support. The trap was sprung, and for 13 years he had to work there.
So he wasn't getting paid a penny?
Not paid a penny.
How did he allow that?
Because, look, if you go back to the transatlantic slave trade, and we've all seen the prints, haven't we? And we've got a mental image.
That's my mental image. Is
your
that.
mental image is that? And
which is roughly what year? When was that?
All the way up until about 1800.
Yeah. Okay.
Something.
Yeah.
But one of the mental images is people in chains.
Yes.
And so you could look, and someone was in chains. You go, okay, slave.
Yeah.
Those chains aren't there anymore. It's psychological chains, and that's how people are held. And it can be in numerous ways. So it could be things like debt bondage. So
debt bondage.
So what we mean by that is, I promise you a job.
Yeah.
So often this is people coming to the UK. I promise you a job. So I arrange your travel, sort your visa out and everything else. You fly here, you've got the right visa, you think you've got the job offer.
You're in the country, you think
you're in.
Yeah.
I meet you the other side of immigration and say, okay, I just need to take your passport to check a few things and all of this, get in the car. That's the last you'll ever see of your passport. You get taken to a house, and then you're told, I know we told you that the flight was $400 and the visa was $100. Actually, it's 10 times that. You now owes $50,000.
Now you're in debt to us.
So you're in debt.
Oh,
so you've got to pay that off. And then you can never pay it off, because then what they'll probably do is they'll hold you in that accommodation for 2 or 3 months, going, oh, yeah, well, the job's not ready yet and everything else. The debt's going up because your rent and your food and everything else in that whole process. If you start complaining, they'll beat you up, threaten your family, etc. Say, actually, you're in breach of the terms of your visa, so actually we could just drop you on, into the police and they'd arrest you. You'd be deported, ruin your life going back. So the hold is
mental torture.
Yeah, the hold is there, even without having to raise a finger, and then you're often inserted into the legitimate workforce, and that becomes very difficult for a business because it will go, well, I'm paying you by backs.
Yeah.
You've got a visa, you've got the permit and everything else. I'm paying all the taxes that I should be doing. What I don't see is who's controlling the bank account.
Yeah, okay.
And they'll use that bank account, and they've smartened up. They used to just empty it, and then we cottoned on to that. Now they just let the bank account run normally, but they'll wash other funds through it the whole time, from other criminal activity, whether it's drugs or whatever. So it is about, in every incident that we find a victim, regardless of the type of exploitation, it is fundamentally about making money at the expense of that individual and not allowing them the freedom to leave or to speak up against their treatment.
Is there a country around Europe that is exploiting more people than most and bringing them into our country?
Exploitation is everywhere. I mean, the UK sees more victims than other countries in Europe, which I would say is a plus, because actually I don't think the scale of exploitation across Europe is any different to here. I think we've just got better at looking at it due to legislation, due to better policing, better understanding of the issue.
So you're saying we've reduced the numbers over the years?
No. At best, at absolute best, we find one, they get replaced. And why wouldn't you? Because it's such a lucrative trade. Yeah. But I think things like COVID, things like the economic crisis that we're now facing is just making the situation worse. And we've never got to a place where we say, can we hand on heart say we're looking under the rock completely? Yeah. We're just lifting it up a bit, and it's quite scary in that whole process. And I think until every police force could say, all of our officers know what modern slavery is, know how it presents, and know what to do about it, and we are proactively looking for it, we'll never know the true scale, because it's a hidden crime. Yeah. And sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, car washes, nail bars, etc. And sometimes it's hidden, really
washes
hidden
as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my favourite one, and this shows the ingenuity of exploiters, it was in Wiltshire, and it was around forced criminality, stroke labour, around a cannabis factory. Yeah. And they'd taken over an old nuclear fallout site, right underground. Yeah. They took the electricity off the grid. Yeah. To
all the hydroponics.
All the hydroponics funded like that. Yeah. And completely, off grid in that whole place. And the only way that you can find those things is that you look along the grid, and where you get suddenly drops
dip, and
all that, you go, look, all right, where's that going?
Yeah. Where's the weed?
Yeah. But it was so far underground you couldn't smell it, and all of that. Yeah. And why? Because it's a hugely lucrative trade itself. But you had people that were locked in there, forced to tend those plants. Yeah. I don't know whether you've ever been in a cannabis factory.
No, I haven't.
Yeah. It's pretty overwhelming.
What, the smell?
The smell.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just,
Have you been in a cannabis factory?
Yeah.
Many of them?
No, but I've been in one.
And what does it look like?
Just plants.
Just plants everywhere and hydroponic lights everywhere.
But then the windows are nailed shut.
Yeah.
The doors are nailed shut. In the really nasty, I haven't seen this, but in the really nasty ones, they'll wire the electrics into the door handles. So if you try and sort of pull it, you'll get a...
What, so you can't get out?
Yeah.
Imagine being trapped.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about, everything you're mentioning is everyone is trapped. How would you get out of something like this? Say if you were in the sex trade, how does someone get out? How does a woman actually go, you know what, I've got to get out, but I'm getting bullied, I'm getting beaten up, they're earning money out of me every minute of every day, they're treating me like I'm just a dog. What's the next step for them to actually get away, run away? They're going to have a lot of fear on them to open themselves up to say, I really, really need help. But at the same time, knowing they're going to come to you for help, knowing that they could get killed or one of their family members could be threatened.
So first and foremost, it takes a huge amount of courage, which is why we call them survivors. I mean, if you think about the hell that you're living in and the fear that you're under for your own life, to go, I'm going to take that courageous step to run and to ask for help is huge. So that's absolutely the critical first step. I mean, we did some research around, specifically around trafficking for sexual exploitation, precisely that question: how do people leave that situation? None of them leave when there's a police raid. They don't identify. They're terrified.
Just keep stum.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't engage.
Yeah.
They leave. Sadly, there are only two options. They are kicked out when they are no longer their exploiters would say they're no longer economically viable.
Yeah.
So they just work to the point of then nobody else wants them, and they literally are kicked out in that whole process. But the problem is they don't know where to turn. They don't trust the police because, imagine living day in, day out where you can't trust anybody in that whole process. So, often they then disappear into, what we call the grey economy and appear later, that they turn up at a homeless shelter or they turn up at A&E and thankfully hopefully there's somebody trained that goes, oh, hang on a moment, this isn't normal.
Alarm bells.
Or they flee and they literally run for their lives.
Abroad?
No, some of them will run to a police station, some of them will run to just like a hospital or a church or, somewhere, where they think I might be safe. And they have the courage to say, this is what's happening to me. And you know what, 15 years ago when I started Unseen, they probably wouldn't have been believed, but actually probably now they are being believed. And then they said, okay, look, there is a program that you can enter that will give you the accommodation and the support and the care that you need whilst we assess your claim. And there are organisations like mine and many others that will say, we'll walk with you. And often I say to my frontline workers, look, our job, its very best is to care for someone so that they can learn to walk again, but they will walk again with a limp for the rest of their lives because of what they've gone through.
Wow. What's it been like for you since you set up the charity Unseen? What's your journey personally been like with growing the charity Unseen to where it is today from when you started 15 years ago?
I have this firm belief about charities in that you should identify the problem that you're trying to fix, and then your number one aim is to address that problem, and then you should shut. We say, one of our mission statements is, we're working to put ourselves out of business, because actually if we're not, then we've lost sight of the fact that slavery is horrible. It shouldn't exist in our world. So actually we have to be focused on that. But I have at least a 50 million size problem in that whole process.
You have a what size problem?
A 50 million victim size problem.
Okay, in the whole process globally. Okay. Are you focusing on globally or are you focusing on UK?
Both.
Okay.
Both, because it's a local problem, it's a national problem, it's an international problem. Like I said earlier, 102 different nationalities have been found in the UK. So we have to accept it is, that phrase "glocal" is the problem. What's it been like? It's been crazy. I kind of describe it as, do you remember when NASA retired the shuttle? They found a couple of booster rockets and strapped them on either side of me and lit the fuse and didn't give me an off switch. It has literally felt, just like that the whole time. It went very fast, from opening the first safe house to, suddenly being in the Home Office and the Serious Crime Agency. The old consultant in me came to the fore going, look, we're not winning, so how are we going to win on this? And I then, I had a friend at a think tank in London called the Centre for Social Justice, and I started badgering them, said, look, this is the biggest social justice issue. that you need to address. And it took 2 years to persuade them. And then in 2011, they said, would you come and chair a report for us? And so I spent 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, the length and breadth of the UK, looking at how is the UK responding to modern slavery. And that's where we first started coining the phrase modern slavery, to really help people understand. Because if you talked about human trafficking, I remember we did a vox pop in Bristol once about what was people's understanding of human trafficking, and I nearly caused a riot because they thought the mayor was going to pedestrianise the whole of the city centre. But no, we're not talking about that. So we produced that report, and we came out with 80 recommendations. And within 8 weeks of that report, I was in the Cabinet Office with Theresa May and all the other members of the Cabinet, where she said, based on this report that you've brought forth, we're now going to bring forth primary legislation, the Modern Slavery Act. And then I lost 2 years of my life to Westminster, sort of helping and supporting and ensuring that we got a reasonable act in place.
Wow.
And so the Modern Slavery Act came in to being it was the very last act passed by the coalition government in 2015.
That is seriously powerful from you, to bring in the Modern Day Slavery Act.
Wasn't just me.
I know it wasn't just you, but you're the driving force behind it. That is really powerful.
Created the momentum for it, yeah.
And if it wasn't you doing that, that might not be in place right now.
Yeah.
Massive respect.
Thank you.
Massive respect. Tell me about the respect you got after that was achieved.
I got a brown envelope one day in the post, and I just
couple of grand.
I had just managed to get 3 points off my license for speeding, and had also done speed school, and I was clear, and I got this, and Ros, my wife, said, "You've got another one." I was trying to think. I've been trying to be good, and I opened it, and it said, "You've been awarded an OBE for your work in tackling modern slavery." And now you can't tell anyone for 6 months. So you have to sit there sort of quietly, and which was great. I mean, it's a huge honour to be recognised.
Huge honour from the Queen.
And so then I got it from the Queen at Windsor Castle. So look, it's an honour, but it's also humbling, and it's also it's recognising actually that it's a collaboration of people in that whole process. But back to what I said, when I started Unseen, we've got to work out how to turn the tap off, and part of that is getting the legislation in place. And in some ways, that's the easy bit.
Yeah.
The difficult bit is actually dealing with the structural issues that allow slavery to happen. So, back to what's my job like? My job increasingly is, and this is why I wanted to come and do this, is talking to people to help them understand what the issue is, what the problems are, what we need to do to address those problems, so that we build that momentum. And it was exactly the same with the transatlantic slave trade, of people going, I really don't want to live in a world where people are exploited to that extent. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
How many slaves work for you?
None.
Can I ask you 3 other questions? I'll answer that question.
Go for it.
Do you eat food?
Yes.
Have you got a smartphone?
Yes.
And thankfully I can see that you're wearing clothes.
Yes. Without
doing anything, you are probably personally connected to 40 to 60 slaves in the world.
I've never thought of it like that.
Through the things that you just purchased.
Yeah.
And if we look around the world, the vast majority of people are held in what we call situations of forced labour. They're in the factories, in the mines, in the fields, either picking, digging out the raw materials or making those materials that we consume. And that's how you get to 40 to 60 people very, very quickly. And I think that has to jolt people into, and it's back to like when I met that police officer, I didn't know that this was going on. Yeah. I mean, I had a kind of like vague recollection,
same here.
Because there were movies, etc. and all that, but you didn't.
Blood Diamond was one.
And you kind of think, okay, but not here.
Yeah. That's my biggest shock of today, is that it's here.
Yeah.
And I understand that there will be people from 102 different nationalities coming into the UK, But to hear that 30% are actually British,
Yeah.
that's really shocked me.
Yeah. And so UK national adults are always in the top 5 of nationalities found, and in children, number 1. And, with kids, it's, and maybe people are kind of vaguely familiar with this, the county lines phenomena.
Yeah. So county lines breaking down, is that bigger drug dealers getting young kids to go and pass the drugs around?
Yeah. But again, it's the deception.
Yeah.
What is it that young kids want? They want community, they want to belong, they want to be accepted in that whole process, and they want things, don't they? I've got to have the night trainers and that and that and that. So they will ply them both with acceptance and with gifts. That's the deception, pulling them in, and then they go, no, they don't come free. Now you've got to do this for me. And that could be drug running. It could be actually selling drugs and all of that. So that's the county lines thing.
And is that being successful in the UK, the county lines? Because I'm constantly hearing about county lines. Is that, have they got a really strong force homing in on that?
They have got focus on it. The police and the government's given resourcing. But for every one you shut down, another one opens up.
Yeah.
And it comes back to, well, why does it pop up? And it, in essence, look, you're a business person. It's about supply and demand. Why does modern slavery happen? It happens because there is a demand for cheap services, cheap labour, and cheap goods. And there is an unlimited demand of vulnerable people. And what makes someone vulnerable? It's if they don't have community, if they don't have a roof over their head, and they don't have work. And so if you can find those people, and they are really easy to find, then you can prey on them really, really quick. And the traffickers are really sophisticated. Add on to that, we are currently having to deal with a war in Ukraine, which is women and children fleeing, and we're dealing with a climate emergency as well. So even if we hit 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming around that, and we're about 1.4 at the moment. So even if we hit 1.5, about a third of the world's population is going to have to move because of climate change. And once you are forced to move, it creates that vulnerability. And so that 50 million figure, invite me back here in 5 years' time.
100. So that could be doubled.
But let's bring it back to we've gone really global, but bring it back to the personal. So the 40 to 60. We have decisions about how and what we're going to consume. And this is where I'm kind of like poacher turned gamekeeper, having worked in the retail trade, which is, often I hear businesses going, well, our customers are demanding cheap, especially in a cost of living crisis. And I go, actually, I've worked in that business. Who educated whom about cheap? And we've lost the value that we attach to things. So we live in such a disposable society, whether it's fashion, the amount of food waste, and just a demand. We want everything at the cheapest, and we don't understand the consequences of that. And the consequences are, and I had the privilege of going to India a few years ago with my old employer, and they took me to some of the factories, and they were good factories, looked after their workers well and everything else. But my overriding impression coming out of that was, and they were making shirts in this one factory, was, I really appreciate what it takes now to make that shirt.
Oh God, there's a lot goes into it, isn't there?
Yeah,
I agree.
And I didn't see how that cotton was picked, how it was spun, how it was dyed. I was seeing the finishing product before it, then gets in a container and comes to the UK. But even that final bit, in a really good factory, it's hard work. And so actually, what I attach now to wearing a shirt is that memory of, actually, this is what it takes to make that. And so, how am I going to think about my purchasing?
Do you think about your purchasing now? I see you're wearing a nice Timberland jumper. Before you paid 100 quid for that, were you thinking where that's come from, how many slaves would have worked on that slave labour?
Yeah, and it's really, really hard. And one of the things that Unseen led on with the Modern Slavery Act was we pushed for what was called Section 54 of the Act, which was called Transparency in Supply Chains, which said to businesses, tell us what you're doing to ensure that there's no forced labour in your business practices. And it's a work in progress. And there's more legislation coming, and it's something I'm currently working on at the moment with others to say, okay, hasn't got us to where we need to be with businesses. We need more. So, I don't know fully the provenance of how this jumper was made. So, I look at things like modern slavery statements. I look at the ethics of companies. I really admire companies like Patagonia that are committed to people and planet, and how they do those things.
How do you look at that? Say if you're your normal bod on the street, what would you be looking out for? Is it the fair trade signs on? Obviously, fair trade signs on chocolate I've seen, and different other things. What would you be looking for in clothes? The stuff that is the everyday. Do you know?
I think it's asking questions, and price isn't a guarantee of something being good. Because I've been in those factories, where you see the designer labels and the supermarket label coming off the same production line in that whole process. I think that the starting point is ask questions, politely, but it has an impact, because if you go into a store and you say, "Can I speak to the manager?" They think, there's an exercise, about to be launched, and I've been on the other side. Can you come down to, Mr. Smith wants to, fire a few rockets at you. But if you go and say, look, I really love your brand, I want to buy this product, but can you tell me what you're doing in order to ensure that there's no forced labour, there's no slavery associated with the making of that product? They'll probably go, and just say that. Look, that's fine. I'm not going to purchase now. I'll come back next week if you can ring your home office and find out.
Just let me know.
And then let me know. Now, if enough people do that, goes up to head office. Guess what happens in head office? Oh, flip.
We've got to get on it.
So that's how consumers can be engaged. Consumers can be engaged by writing to their MPs. And I know it's not terribly fashionable at the moment, but just saying, look, I've heard about this issue. I personally, and for my kids and my community, I don't want to live in a world that is associated with this. Can you please support the efforts of charities like Unseen and others that are trying to take the legislation up to the next level, so that companies are really honest? And then we work with companies all the time now. Some of the big global companies, and we said, look, the issue is not whether you find it or not. It's not if you find it; it's when you find it, because it's there the whole time. And we would far rather, we'll cheer you on if you find it, because it actually means that those people are getting out of that situation. And then let's go in together and look at that situation and say, how did this happen in the first place? How can we stop it? How can we take that learning and apply it around the globe to your business? And how can we provide better mechanisms for workers to speak up?
I want to go back to your safe houses. I want to go back to the traffickers bringing people in. You're helping people I put into the safe houses. What's being done to hunt down those traffickers?
It varies. I think I said earlier, like the chances of getting caught globally are like 0.01%.
What about the chance of getting caught in Britain? If you know that you've got 4 sex workers, they're all bringing it back to these 3 guys who have brought them over, is it in your hands or is it out of your hands? How close are you working with the police to make sure that those 3 get nicked or get brought to justice? Or do they just flee away, they bring 3 more new girls in and the problem carries on?
Great question, slightly complicated answer. So the usual criminal process happens in terms of the police will have somebody in front of them, and they have to work with that individual who is terrified. So part of our job, our joint working with the police, is to help that individual get to a place where they feel safe. And to explain to them, yes, it is still your choice as to whether you want to engage with policing or not, but we really would encourage you to. Many choose not to because they're in fear of their
Yeah.
lives. And they may be safe, but they still don't know about
Yeah.
their family. And, you know, we have had incidents of traffickers actually physically threatening the family
Yeah.
of victims that are, you know, in our care.
Yeah.
So we have to be, you know, we have to accept that not everybody will. But for those that do have the courage, they work with the police. And then the police will, you know, carry out investigations, but they're complex
Yeah.
investigations. These people are really good at covering their tracks. Any whiff of somebody coming after them, they can flee the country in a moment's notice. They can get the money overseas as well. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is the helpline, you know, which is constantly gathering information and feeding that information into the relevant police forces, as well as National Crime Agency and Border Force, because it is about building an intelligence picture that enables the police to then execute a warrant and then take those people to court.
But that sounds quite long-winded.
Yeah.
From knowing the police and understanding there's not enough police out there, for number one.
Yep.
Two, there's too many crimes going on out there for them to do it, and the paperwork for them to actually do it. I'm sure, and I don't know the facts, I'm sure quite a high percentage of these traffickers are getting away with this.
Yeah, they are. About 98%.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Bloody hell. So give me some numbers. You reckon it's 100,000 modern day slaves in the UK?
Yeah, at any one time.
At any one time. 30% of them are British,
Yeah.
roughly. And so out of that's 100,000, you're saying only 2% of the traffickers are caught and put to prison?
Yeah, but remember, it's not a one-to-one relationship. So a trafficker...
Oh, of course. Okay,
yeah.
he might have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. Okay. But 2% is really low.
Yeah.
How can we get to the root cause of this?
That's a great question. I think it's a whole society response. Slavery happens because there's a demand for it, like I said earlier. So you and I have a responsibility. You know, we're not... you want your car washed. You go to that car wash. It's 15 quid for a full valet.
Yeah.
And there's 8 people doing it. Well, they ain't getting paid minimum wage, are they?
No.
In that whole process. And yet the queue on a Saturday morning is
heaving.
Is heaving.
Yeah.
So it is about our personal choices to start with. The second thing is the more we look after victims better,
Yeah.
that we, you know, the current political narrative is demonizing, you know, people. But if we look after them really well, then what we find is that they want to engage with policing because they're like you and me. They have an inherent understanding of what justice is in that whole process. And even if they don't have enough evidence to give to the police, they can start building a picture that helps the police find out more of what's going on. Then actually there needs to be more resourcing. So remember I said this is a trade that's worth $500 billion profit per annum. We spent globally last year fighting this issue about £350 million. So it's an unfair fight.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying we need to spend $500 billion, but actually we need to resource. We need more policing. We actually need in every police force a dedicated unit because it's a complex crime that you have officers that really understand it, know how to deal with it, know how to work well with victims, know how to work well with multi-agency teams. We need members of the public to speak up when they see things, you know, to call our helpline and to report what's going on. We need our politicians to draft and legislate better legislation in that whole process. We need businesses to say we will root out forced labour in our supply chains. Unless it's that whole society effort, we need media like this podcast to go out and people to listen to it so that they understand it is an enormous problem, but the solution actually involves each and every one of us. And I go back to the previous slave trade. What tipped it, you know, politicians will tell you it was William Wilberforce. My reading of history is actually what tipped it was society said, we don't want this. And they said, and back then it was about sugar. We're going to stop buying sugar. And it was that act that brought the business barons to accepting that it was over.
I totally get that, but I can't see a way out here. For everything you're describing here, I think the getting more media out there and saving and what you guys are doing is helping these survivors is absolutely amazing. All of that I totally get.
Yeah.
But I can't see the way out of getting these traffickers who are sharp, earning hundreds of thousands of pounds per man, no doubt, maybe 200 grand, maybe $250,000 if they've got 4 or 5 girls, 6 girls, whatever it may be, and they're taking the money.
Yeah.
There's no way you can go and get them. We haven't got the police force to go and get them. They can slip out the country very, very quickly.
But remember, it's about a supply and demand trade. So if the demand's not there, that's how you crack it.
But do you think the demand will always be there?
What, for cheap goods, services and labour?
Yeah.
Possibly.
The oldest trade on the planet is prostitution.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to get their cars cleaned for 15 quid inside and outside, and people will choose to buy a t-shirt that's 3 quid or a t-shirt that's 10 quid. People would choose the 3 quid one.
Okay.
And I'm not saying everyone there,
No.
but the more we can bring it out there, like this podcast out there, and bring it out to say, just be aware, just to be aware.
So I'm old enough and ugly enough
Yeah.
to remember when you couldn't get a hand car wash for 15
That's
quid.
right. It was 50 quid if you want it valeted back
Yeah.
in the... I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And you couldn't get a T-shirt for 3 quid that you can get in Primani now or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It just wasn't available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when people say, "Oh, you haven't got," I say, "Yeah, my job as chief executive of a charity is to actually put ourselves out of business." And they go, "Well, you're not going to do that." And I said, "But actually, that's not the right way to look at
Yeah,
it,
you need
because
to-
I have to believe that there is possible for a world without slavery."
Yeah.
And I passionately believe that.
Mm.
I may not be alive to see it, but that's what we're pursuing.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's what other organisations like ours are pursuing. So we then go back to, well, how do we address this £15 car wash,
Yeah.
car valet versus what it used
Yeah.
to be? Well, part of that is legislation. Part of that is educating the public. Part of that is confronting people with the reality of the person that just washed and cleaned your car is a slave.
Yeah.
Is that what
See,
you want
that's
to know?
that's really powerful.
Yeah.
But how can we get to prove that they're a slave, that we can actually start talking about this on social media and start spreading the word and actually go, you know what, because I get my car cleaned once every month or 2 months. I go down there and there's 6 or 8 lads all around there. I have a laugh with them, 6 or 8 lads all cleaning, and give them a little tip afterwards, and it hasn't even crossed my mind.
Yeah.
It has not even crossed my mind, Andrew, that they could be slaves.
So next weekend when you go and get your car washed, you'll be looking going, oh, hang on. How comfortable am I with this?
Yeah.
That this could be there.
Yeah.
This could be them. And now, William Wilberforce said
Do you think
this.
do you think I could go and ask them? I feel like now you've brought this to my light, that I actually want to go and speak to the people at the car wash and just have a chat with them. Whether they speak up or not, I don't know.
They're unlikely to speak up.
Yeah.
Victims very rarely self-identify. But if you look at it and you go, okay, 15 quid, 8 people,
Doesn't add up.
I bet only one person takes the payment.
Yeah.
Cash.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Porter cabin.
Yep.
Ooh, why are there sleeping bags in that porter
Yeah.
cabin?
Yeah.
Call the helpline. Say, this car wash, I'm concerned about this, everything else.
So anyone listening out there who is actually seeing a nail bar,
Yeah.
and a nail bar out there is, obviously we don't get our nails done, but I certainly don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get yours done.
Every day.
But a nail bar is,
Yeah.
from what I've seen, is there are Asian ladies in there
Yep.
banging out 40, 50 people nails each day.
Yep.
And you're saying that could be slavery?
Could be. Not all.
Mm.
But again, go back to the same thing as the car wash. Going to have a manicure used to cost about 80 quid.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's now,
Tenors.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, you go in, speak very little English, if any English at all. There's someone sitting in the corner. There's a CCTV camera up the top. They won't engage with you, eye contact, everything
down,
else.
yeah.
And even if you ask them, non-engagement in that whole and I've been on police, what we call problem profile visits, where they go and visit sites where they suspect exploitation is taking place. They won't say anything. But it's interesting. They all have the same story about how they got there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is my cousin, and I came from London. They said I had a job and everything else.
Yeah.
You go to the next one. Oh yeah, my cousin from London. So it's a pre-learned storyline in that whole process. And hundreds and thousands of people have been found, in situations of forced labour.
And we're saying forced labour. Are you saying forced labour is work for nothing, or forced labour you're on £3 an hour, or £2 an hour, £1 an hour?
You might be paid something.
Yeah. But not your £9, it's not your minimum wage of £9.15.
Yeah, and certainly not a living wage.
Yeah.
The key differentiator, and it's kind of like exploitation is on a continuum.
Yeah.
Like you can be, a bad employer, not pay minimum wage or not pay holiday pay or sick pay, etc. And you could and should be prosecuted for that.
Yeah.
It becomes forced labour where somebody is either not paid or paid a pittance, and they're not free to leave that situation.
Yeah.
Like your employees here, if they don't like you as a boss, then go, I'm off. I'm going to get another job. I get more pay, whatever, and you go, fair enough.
Yeah.
In that whole process. If you're a slave master, they ain't leaving.
Yeah, they can't.
Yeah.
With the fear.
Yeah.
What an awful position to be in. I know it's obvious to say that, but imagine being trapped by another human being who you don't know, and there's no way out for you, and there's no phone calls you can make. You've got the fear of yourself and the family. You've got a roof over your head, but you're earning no money. You've been told what to do. You're being used for sex or being violently beaten up. That makes me, like, I didn't know how this conversation was going to go.
How does it make you feel?
It makes me feel sad, if I'm honest with you. It really does.
And I defy anybody to meet a survivor and hear their story, to not be moved and to not go, this is wrong on every single level.
Yeah.
I have the privilege of leading an organisation that, currently at any one time we have 200 clients in our service.
So you've got 200 clients in one of your houses?
No. Some in accommodation and some in what we call outreach.
So outreach, you keep an eye on them and speak to them.
And, the stories come up of what people have experienced. And some of them, I've met and talked with.
It must be harrowing.
It is. It's both harrowing and it's also hopeful. Yeah. Because you see just how courageous they are, and they're almost, to quote Iggy Pop, their lust for life. Yeah. Because actually
they got hope.
They've been denied life, and we try and bring them safety, hope, and choice. Yeah. The three things.
What is it? Safety, hope,
and choice.
Choice. Okay.
The three things that you're denied. If you're not free to leave, if you don't feel safe, and hope for the future. But we face a reality of people presenting with PTSD, with horrendous physical ailments, with STDs, with emotional trauma, with fear for their family at home. Sometimes you've been in a forced labour situation, you've been paid an absolute pittance, and then you're sending that pittance home because that's actually why you came, or you fell into the trap of wanting to work, and then you're not able to work in that whole process. And it is appalling, man's inhumanity to man, because what gives the right to anybody to do that to a fellow human being? And there is, I can sort of almost dispassionately say, a trafficker and exploiter turns somebody into a commodity. But that's devastating. Yeah. It devastates that individual, it devastates that family, it's devastating ultimately to our economy, to business, to society. And it's one of those horrible truths that we have to confront people with. Yeah. And if you say, well, what's part of my job? Why am I doing this? And I can see you. There's a sort of creeping dread of reality washing over you because you didn't know, and that's fine. But now that you do know, you have two choices. And one is to say, I don't want to live in that world, and I'm going to do everything that's within my power.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you have to start a charity, it doesn't mean you have to do that, but you can make choices. Or I'm going to choose to deliberately ignore that fact and just carry on as if I didn't know about it. And I think modern slavery is one of those issues that you can't carry on. And, you know, back to, you know, we're never going to deal with it. But we deal with it one person at a time, and we deal with it one listener at a time, and we deal with it one politician at a time, until we build a momentum where society says, do you know what? That's not acceptable. It's a bit like...
And that's what we need to get to.
Yeah. And it's a bit, and people say, oh, you know, you're never going to do this within business, or you're never going to do it. And the analogies I use are and they're clunky. But, you know, sometimes when we legislate for things that, you know, so we're not going to allow, say, forced labour goods to come into this country or leave this country, which is something that we're working on at the moment. You know, and sometimes you get a pushback from business, no, you can't do that and everything else. And it said, but sometimes it's a bit like the legislation around a seatbelt. You know, back in the 70s, there was a huge campaign. It was an outrage that we would wear a seatbelt in a car.
And look now,
everybody puts a seatbelt on. And they go, actually, I understand why. You know, it can save my life. It keeps me safe. It's good for society, etc. Or look at smoking. Or you know, it's an infringement of our civil liberties that we're not allowed to smoke. Everybody does that. You know, if someone lights up in a hospital,
you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But I was on a plane the other day, and you still see the smoking signs, the old planes.
Yeah, the old ones.
How did people smoke on planes? I do not know.
Well, I've been on a plane when people smoked. It was horrible.
No, I remember as a kid.
Yeah,
but
they were down the back, and you never went down the back because it was like a fog.
I just want to go back to these traffickers because they're bugging me.
Yeah.
I feel really bugged by them, and how we can. I don't know how we can get to these, but I think it's been very difficult, if I'm being brutally honest on that one. But there's got to be a way, and like you say, we'll take every day by every day and let more people know about it, and hopefully that will end up stopping in 20 years, 30 years, long before when we're gone, you know. How much, have you done any sums on how much each trafficker potentially is earning?
No, I mean, I gave you that global figure, and we know that, you know...
if we're just talking sex traffickers here, is there a sum on a sex trafficker that you've caught to say, okay, well, I've had X amount of girls, they've been earning $1,000 a night, and I'm taking all the money?
It's really unscientific in that whole process. Now, let me back up. One of the things that we got in the legislation was all of these crimes are what we call lifestyle crimes. So when we catch the people, we can take all of the assets and money, ill-gotten gains off them, which is a good thing. Difficult to do, but at least you got the legislation to do it. I've seen figures somewhere between like 125 and 250,000 pounds per individual.
Per trafficker, per sex trafficker.
Yeah. Wow. But back to it. Look, you're a business person. What I'm telling you about are illicit traders.
Yeah.
They'll look at your business and go, how can I make money out of that business? How can I insert my commodity to make money, either in your business, or how can I put things in your sphere of influence and choice in order to make money? A car wash, a nail bar.
Anything else we can throw out there so the listeners can hear? Because I'm hearing car wash,
factories, agricultural fields, distribution centres, logistics, restaurants, takeaways, cleaning, care, facilities, security.
So any of those
construction.
So any of those, as a legit businessman, you think you're paying them into their bank account because everything's in place, but actually the trafficker is actually taking the money from their bank account.
Yeah.
And we will never know.
Yeah. Here's one thing that you can know though, and
that's unbelievable, by the way.
No, it's reality.
I know it is, but that's actually unbelievable because you start thinking now. Everywhere I go now, I'm going to be thinking, is that going into your bank account if you're maybe a cleaner from a foreign nationality, or you are working in a field, or you are whatever it may be, a nail bar or
care home worker.
Yeah. Andrew, this conversation has been really powerful, really, really powerful. and I was really excited to get you on. Just before we finish here, tell me about the day that you met the Queen to get your OBE.
Got up very early. Well, actually, before there's a bit before that. So, 3 kids, wife, plus me is 5. You only get 4 tickets.
No.
5 into 4 doesn't go.
No,
yeah.
No.
Thankfully, my middle one is not a royalist, so
Okay.
that resolves the problem in that whole process. Then it was quite expensive because apparently everybody needed new clothes to go and do that. Up early, drove to Windsor. You go through security. You know, when we all watched the Queen's funeral, you drive up that
big long drive.
That big long drive. Park the car. You get out, and then you're separated straight away. You know, so.
What, from the family?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you go off. I don't know where they went, but we eventually found each other again after the ceremony. And you're taken into quite a small space with everybody else that's been awarded, and then you're separated again. So if you're getting a knighthood or a damehood or a CBE, you go into one room, and then the OBEs, MBEs, and BMEs, I think, in another room. And you're in a room with all of these people across a whole cross-section of society, and just talking. You're given a glass of wine, and just sort of finding out why people were there. And I ended up talking to a geneticist, an actor, and someone from business. Yeah, it's a real cross section of society. And then you're taken out, and you get and at Windsor they said the Queen actually really prefers doing the ceremonies at Windsor to Buckingham Palace. She really loved Windsor. And you go down this very long hall, sort of side hall. There's a main hall in the middle, and there's a side hall that you go down. And you're lined up in order. It's very, very slick, lined up in order. And then you're told, okay, when you get to the front, you'll turn to the right, and you'll be able to see into where the investiture is taking place. And when it's your turn, you've got to walk on a diagonal to the centre point. When you get there, turn, bow, then walk forward. The Queen will say a few words to you.
Do you remember what she said to you?
Yeah. Hang on, you're spoiling.
No, I'm excited. I'm excited for this bit, the build-up.
So you're watching that, and actually, I don't get nervous in many situations, but actually, sort of the people talk about when they met the Queen. It was quite nerve-wracking. It was sort of nerve-wracking, sort of waiting and everything else, and you're thinking, right, walk in a diagonal, turn, bow, walk forward, talk, shake hands, bow, walk backwards, and then walk at a diagonal to the other side and out. So you're like
focused.
Don't muck this up and everything else. And then the person in front of me went up, spoke to the Queen, shook hands, and then turned around and walked away. And as they were walking away, you could just see on their face going, "Oh crap, I've got this wrong." And so I think you're doubly thinking, "I'm not doing that." Yeah. And then they're in that quandary, like, do I turn around and walk backwards? Like,
play it cool.
So they sort of gradually turned around, bowed, and then like skedaddle. I went up. I tell you, this was remarkable. So when did I get this? 2015. So what was that? 7 years ago. So she was 89. And you go up, and yes, she's got her aide, who whispers something in her ear. But I went up, and she said, "Thank you for all of the work that you're doing to combat modern slavery. It's an awful issue, and I want to encourage you to keep going." And that was it.
Powerful.
And shook hands, remembered to bow, walk backwards, and leave. But it struck me, 89 years old, switched on.
To everyone coming in.
Coming in. And there's a good few people there, and just having that. Now I know she's done it year in, year out, and everything else. But it was
true
just
professional.
You just go, good on you.
Yeah, respect.
For that.
Yeah. Andrew, loved this. Absolutely loved it. And anyone listening out there, I hope we can all learn a lot from all the things you mentioned out there. Before we finish up, where can people find you? And if people want to donate, how can they donate?
So you can find us on the web at unseenuk.org, there's a big donate button. Just press it and
whack some money in.
Yeah. The more noughts, the merrier. In that whole process, or I'll become a regular giver in that whole process, and we'll keep you up to date with everything that we're doing. You can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. So on Twitter at AndyW1. And on LinkedIn, just look for Andrew Wallis, and you'll find me there. And give us a follow and keep learning more.
Brilliant. Andy, I've really, really enjoyed this, mate. I thank you for your time and effort coming down here.
No, absolute pleasure. Great to talk to you.
You're a gentleman. Good man.
Cheers.
Cheers, mate.